within which we are within which we are calling for accountability from the city to act with a sense of urgency in terms of the delivery of affordable housing in well-located areas, particularly on those sites where commitments have been made for the delivery of affordable housing. The four aspects that I'll just quickly speak to are concerned primarily with the contemporary land and housing crisis. I think we can all appreciate that our context is undeniably informed by the legacy of both the colonial and apartheid eras, which at the heart of implementing racial economic segregation had land as a tool to dispossess, to deprive people. And we haven't been able to, in tangible terms, been able to overcome that. And there's of course various solutions to this problem, which I think is at the heart of inequality in our city. And one of the solutions that we, Ndifuna Ukwazi and others I see in the room, DAG is present, of course Reclaim the City is present, have been advocating for is the release of well-located parcels of land to begin to disrupt the legacy of the colonial and apartheid eras. But in addition, of course, to this historical context is the contemporary context of our land and housing crisis, which is informed by various aspects, but I'll just speak to four. And the first is just the sheer overwhelming need for housing in our city. In Cape Town alone, the housing backlog is estimated at around 300 or close to 400,000 qualifying households. And there's possibly a lot more than that, knowing that not everybody is registered and far more would qualify, particularly given the economic fallout in these COVID times. But quite simply, what that means is that more homes need to be built at a faster rate by both the state and the private sector. Another aspect of our contemporary land and housing crisis is just the increasingly unaffordable and exclusive land market that we're situated in. Recently, Cape Town, the city, was forecasted to see the highest annual increase in property prices of any city during the world in 2021. We're only matched by Shanghai. And so for us to have that kind of experience of an exclusionary land market and actually be driven by that is telling about the ability for people to afford housing in the city. The average sale price for a home in Cape Town in 2019 was about 1.5 million rand. And this is the highest average in South Africa. And it's a price that less than 5% of families living in our city are actually able to afford, which means that families, particularly Black families, are priced out of the well-located areas that they were legally barred from under apartheid. And so the inability to move from the past is also informed by the market as a driver or determining factor in terms of who will get access to affordable housing, and particularly where that affordable housing might be. Another aspect is the role that the state has the role of state housing or subsidized housing delivery has played in entrenching spatial inequalities. There are obviously a lot of aspects that would inform a more spatially just way of delivering housing, which for us and many others here entails a revisiting of the location of where that housing is. But with delivery on the periphery or outskirts of the city being prioritized over the location. This means that we have a reproduction of the apartheid city, and whether this has happened intentionally or not, this is a real situation that we're in. It's not enough to have commitments to addressing the legacy of apartheid spatial planning without these being moved on with a sense of urgency, which brings me to the last and final aspect of part of my input in terms of articulating the context is that there is, I think, a political barrier, so to speak, that we need to be addressing directly in terms of addressing what I would say is the reproduction of the structural violence in terms of where people live in the city, work in the city, and just an inability to undo that with a sense of urgency. Just a few weeks ago, we were reminded of the harsh reality of the structural violence in our city, with people walking 4 or more hours in one direction, walking from Wynberg to Nyanga, walking from the city center to Gugulethu and other routes that are as a result of the infrastructural, spatial, and emotional barriers in our city. And so I think we have to ask directly, and I'm hoping that this meeting will bring us to some kind of resolution, as Wutle has prompted us to think about how to call on direct accountability and really ask whether it's enough for a city that is tasked with addressing these layers of inequality to simply inform the public of progress, of plans, of challenges, almost as a reactive and sometimes defensive and deflective way, through, for example, the statement that was released today, acknowledging the context that we're in, that commitments or promises do not secure homes, and the need to build homes. And I think we do acknowledge the challenges and various tangible technical challenges that result. But I think the mandate is clear, and there is power in people coming together to call on that mandate and call on accountability through engagement and other means with the city.
Thanks, Comrade Shandu. That was Comrade Mandisa Shandu, comrades, the director of Ndifuna Ukwazi, giving us the context of this struggle that members of the public in Ndifuna Ukwazi came this city waged alongside many other organizations such as DEC present in this virtual meeting, giving us its context, tracing it back to the legacy of colonialism and apartheid, and to say that 27 years into this so-called democratic dispensation, Cape Town still and remains one of the biggest and most unequal cities in Cape Town in terms of race and class, and where people are actually allocated, or rather located. You find the majority of the masses of our people far in the peripheries. There isn't genuine inclusion of the historically marginalized masses of our people. And part of this work is to try to undo that legacy that continues to shape and characterize Cape Town today. So that was the background to this work, comrades, or to the struggle that has been waged by many organizations and members of the public. We'll get an opportunity, comrade, to engage with Comrade Manis about that background. But at this point, with your permission, comrades, I'd like to proceed to a further political discussion that Comrade Bevan and Comrade Karen will introduce us to. They're currently in the occupations, comrades, who are joined by hundreds of people in the occupations currently viewing this public meeting. And Comrade Bevan and Comrade Karen are leaders of Reclaim the City. And they will give us the context, the political context of these 11 sites, and what does these promises mean to comrades that are in these occupations, to members of the public that are standing to be beneficiaries, or who are standing to be beneficiaries of this affordable housing, the marginalized masses of people who've been excluded out of the city. So we will allow Comrade Bevan and Karen to give us that political context, and what does it mean to people that have grown up in that Woodstock area, who by virtue of this gentrification are being kicked out of their homes, of the places that they know to be their homes, that they grew up in. So I'll afford Comrade Bevan an opportunity at this point to give us the history of the campaign work, because there's been this work has been politically charged work, comrades, politically contested terrain that has been championed by the forces on the ground. So Comrade Bevan will allow you leadership to give us that historical background of the campaign, that has led us to being given these 11 sites today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for affording us this opportunity. I think we have to speak about the making of Woodstock in the context of how colonial influence still prevails in today's political arrangements. I think the one thing that is very stark in the city of Cape Town is the representation of Dutch colonialism. The castle is a concrete expression of how the city has continued with its policy of exclusion in the making of the city of Cape Town. It's no coincidence that we had high expectations from a post-apartheid state to deliver and address the crisis of housing which we face in not only our country, but in our city also. Woodstock as a working class city, as a working class area in Cape Town, was populated once by railway workers, by clothing factory workers, by stevedores, by hotel workers. And as the development and as gentrification started to take off, we had to find a response to the crisis that was being mounted upon and against the working class in this part of the city. And so when we created and took up the campaign around decent housing for all and housing for people, not for profit, it became very clear that this struggle is a long-term struggle. It's a struggle in which there has to be political commitment by the authorities of the day. So we're sitting with a legacy of apartheid that has to be undone and can be undone. However, it's the failure of the political authorities to exercise the political will to ensure the delivery of mass housing. There was an attempt in 94 with the RDP program. However, that was insufficient. The crisis has now has almost doubled to what it was. And the failure by the DA-led city has compounded this particular crisis. So when we made the call for decent housing, we also looked at how and where would that be possible. And we came up with the fact that it is very possible within this city to deliver and address the crisis that we are facing. So the 11 sites has come about as a result of the pressure mounted by working class people, mounted by people who chose consciously to occupy the old Woodstock Hospital as a means to develop some form of accommodation. And we've been able to do this to provide for close to 1,000 people who otherwise would be homeless within this part of the city. An important aspect was when the authorities of the day decided to make some form of comment on our campaign, they then identified public land that was owned by the city for the consideration for social housing or decent housing. And that has been 2017. We are now almost 5 years down the line, and there's not yet one single development. What there has been is a development of temporary housing in Pickwick, but beyond that, there has not been. For example, the Salt River Market, nothing has happened there. Yet, how do we advance and address the crisis that is being faced by people when land has been identified? However, it has not moved beyond the identification. The city pronounces that it's not just when we identify that things will happen, but it begs the question, how does the working class communities that is organized into different social movements across the city become part of shaping that development that has to take place and can take and must take place? And so we are quite clear in our approach that it is possible to address the crisis, but it does require a commitment to include those communities that is affected by those situations, to enable them to express themselves how and what is possible, and how they could contribute as organized formations of the community to participate and to make a contribution as active citizens in this part of the city also. I will now ask Karen to continue with
Thanks.
Where I end up.
Thanks, Comrade. Comrade Karen? Comrade
Hi.
Karen.
And so we continued to campaign around these 11 sites. The 11 sites were earmarked for affordable housing or low-cost housing since the 18th of July 2018. In 2019, we again got together and we had a public meeting to address the promise or the of these earmarked sites by having a public meeting and by celebrating the second anniversary of this promise of the 11 sites. In 2019, 5 of these sites had gone to tender. And ever since then, there's been slow development, but there's also been no new breaking ground, and there's also been no response from the city regarding these 11 sites. And so we continue to campaign around these 11 sites, of which the Sissy House, which we are occupying now, is one of the 11 sites. In 2019, we met with the city officials to engage with them around the co-design of the Sissy House with the occupiers who are the existing occupiers who live at the Sissy House or the Old Woodstock Hospital. And we will continue to push for these sites and for housing on these well-located sites going forward.
Thanks, Comrade Karen, and Comrade Bevo for that very substantive input on the history of the campaign of these sites. Comrades, without wasting time, we don't want to consume a lot of time. Understand that people are coming back from work and we want to stick to time as soon as possible. And I would like to request the speakers to stick to the time. We are moving, comrades, to a video so that the colleagues and the comrades that I can get to see these sites that I'm speaking about, these 11 sites and where they're currently at. So we'll just play a video for everyone that has been compiled by Comrade Zach to give us a clear picture of where we are with these 11 sites, or where they are at this point in time.
Cape Town is one of the most unequal cities in the world in terms of race and class. Every day, hundreds of thousands of poor and working class families, most of whom are Black and colored, struggle to access land and decent, affordable housing in Cape Town. In the 27 years since the end of apartheid, not a single affordable housing unit has been built in inner city Cape Town suburbs from which Black, colored, and Indian people were historically removed. On 18 July 2017, the City of Cape Town announced its commitment to develop social and affordable housing on 11 sites of public land in the inner city, Woodstock and Sword River. 4 years after the city's commitment to release and develop affordable housing on 11 sites, progress has been slow. Of the 11 sites committed, only one of these projects is complete, and none of the other 10 have broken ground. Let's see what progress has been made on these commitments. The Pickwick Road Transitional Housing Project is one of the 11 site housing projects that has been completed. In May 2019, the transitional housing facility was occupied by 19 families who were moved from one of the other sites to make way for development. The Pickwick facility offers these families temporary housing until they are able to access decent permanent homes. The Panwood Road social housing project is in the final stages before construction begins, making it the most advanced of the other projects. The project, which is being developed by SOCO alongside Delon Lane site, will consist of 243 social housing units. SOCO originally aimed to finish building around September 2021, but after COVID-19 related and funding delays, the project is yet to break ground. After delays in planning approvals as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, the city has recently secured the planning approvals needed to build on the Delon Lane social housing project, which is aimed for 150 to 160 social housing units. The city said that the project is nearing the construction phase, with the next step being the submission of the site development plan, known as the SDP, to further prepare the site for the commencement of the construction. Fruit and veg in the inner city. In 2017, the city in its prospectus called on private developers to submit proposals for the development of fruit and veg site for a minimum of 50 social housing units in a way that incorporates the current fruit and veg and streetscape urban garden. The city also invited proposals on Woodstock Hospital and the Hospital Park, New Market Street, and Pickwick Roadside. After receiving private sector proposals in 2018, the city abandoned the process and never opened any of the proposals. After this, there was uncertainty about the future of the sites. The city recently said that this site, which it now can estimate can accommodate approximately 150 units, it is in the early feasibility stage. If this land is still going to be used for affordable housing, it will not be anytime soon. The remainder of the Pickwick Road project consists of mixed-use development, which will include between the originally committed 600 and 400 social housing apartments. Although the city has not appointed a social housing institution to develop the site yet, as of July 2021, the development consultants appointed by the city are packaging the site for the maximum density. This entailed getting the land ready for development, securing the necessary planning and environmental approvals, and it includes a conceptual design of the site. Similar to fruit and veg site, the city originally invited proposals for the development of the New Market Street site to include a minimum of 300 social housing units. In November 2020, after years of inaction, the city published a notice announcing its plans to lease the New Market Street site to a private company known as Growth Point to use the site as a parking lot for 3 years. After objections from Ndifuna Ukwazi and the city's Human Settlement Department, the city decided to abandon this lease. In May 2021, the city announced that it planned to lease the site to the city's Human Settlements Department instead, to enable the department to develop social housing on the site. In terms of the city's notice, the land will be leased to the department for 30 years at a nominal rental of 150 Rand per year. The city will be securing the necessary planning permissions. The Salt River Market was assigned in the prospectus to communicate for mixed-use development, including social and gap housing. Although the site was identified for affordable housing as early as 2008, the Salt River Market project has been delayed due to challenges around the disposal of the land. The city aims to finish the disposal by the end of 2021. The city says that this project is also nearing the construction phase for mixed-use development, which includes 200 social housing units. The site on the Upper Canterbury Street was earmarked for future housing development in the prospectus. To date, there has not been any progress on the site, James Street and Salt River. In the city's prospectus, the James Street site is earmarked for development of transitional housing for the residents of an informal settlement on the Salt River Market site. To date, there hasn't been no progress on the site. Sisigu House, formerly Woodstock Hospital Park and Woodstock Hospital. These sites are currently occupied by poor and working class families who have campaigned for a collaborative upgrading process. For almost 4 years, Sisigu House has offered refuge and a safe house to poor and working class families that would have otherwise have faced homelessness and displacement as a result of a rampant gentrification and eviction in Woodstock and Salt River areas. In 2019, the city's own consultant confirmed that it would be possible to co-design affordable housing on the site with the families currently living there. Despite this, On Friday, 12 February 2021, the City of Cape Town Sheriff served court papers on almost 900 occupiers of Sisiko House. The city has applied for a court-ordered survey of the families living in Sisiko House, but the ultimate goal of its application is an eviction. Cape Town's housing crisis is growing in scale and intensity every year. More and more people are being forced into precarious housing, and many people will die while waiting for a home. If we want to build a city that truly works for everyone, it is time that affordable housing projects get the attention and the support they deserve. Join our upcoming public meeting to learn more about the barriers slowing this project down and to collectively strategize how to urgently and get affordable homes on the ground.
Thanks for that video. That is a video that has been compiled by communications officer Ndifuna Ukwazi, just shedding some light in terms of where we are currently at with this 11 sites. We'll now hand over to Nick Butlander to expand more on the Salt River Market site, to give us the case study and the recommendations in terms of how to move in terms of championing this struggle and so that the promises are delivered on. Comrade Nick Butlander.
Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you to NU and Reclaim the City for having me. As people mentioned earlier, I used to work at Ndifuna Ukwazi for 2 years between 2017 and 2019, and I now work as an urban policy researcher on a freelance basis. So this is Salt River Market, which I'm going to be speaking to you about today. You saw it on the video. It is an extremely well-located and valuable and strategic piece of land that is close to schools and hospitals and jobs and all sorts of other opportunities that many people are denied. To the left of this image is Salt River Circle, and running along the back of it is the train line. And that really shows that this is a very strategic and very well located piece of land. So in 2020, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to do a master's degree, and I focused on Salt River Market and the barriers and delays to the development. I did a whole bunch of interviews with social housing institutions and government officials and politicians and NGOs and consultants and all sorts of people who'd been involved in the process, and also a whole bunch of documentary research looking at reports and policies and press releases and all that type of stuff. So Salt River Market was first proposed as a site for affordable housing as far back as 2008. And at the time, there were some officials working for the city of Cape Town who looked at the site and thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to sort of provide some integration in the city. And they began with the project preparation and packaging work. So packaging really is just a fancy way of saying that that's all the sort of preparatory work that has to happen before a piece of land is ready to be developed. That's like feasibility studies and traffic impact assessments and environmental impact assessments, et cetera, et cetera. It was only when Brett Herron arrived and took on his role as the head of the Transport and Urban Development Authority that we actually started to see some movement, because he'd sort of come through on a campaign of well-located affordable housing, and it was an issue that he seemed to take very seriously. So in 2014, 6 years after the site was initially identified, it was allocated to Communicare, which is Cape Town's oldest and most well-established social housing institution. The city said to Communicare that they want a mixed income development, and I'll speak a little bit more about why this is important now. And Salt River Market was meant to include social housing, which caters to people earning between, or households earning between 1,500 and 15,000 Rand a month. Gap housing, which caters to people who earn too much for government subsidy, but too little for the open market. And then also it was meant to include market rate housing. So the reason that there were several reasons that a mixed income model was chosen or proposed for the site. The first is that social housing subsidies are actually too small to build anything that's more dense or bigger than 4 stories. And, you know, Cape Town is sprawling city with a very sort of inefficient spatial form, and the city of Cape Town actually wants to densify the city and make sure that well-located areas can accommodate a higher number of people. So, but unfortunately, social housing subsidies are too small to build anything that's dense. So the city thought that if they used a mixed income model, the rent and income from the more expensive homes could be used to subsidize both the cost of building taller, but also could be used to sort of subsidize the housing costs of people on lower incomes. So, these arguments make quite a lot of sense. They really wanted to try and take advantage of a site that's very well located and that's very valuable. And as part of that, there was a commitment to release the land at 10% of its market value, which is the sort of best practice or normal practice when it comes to social housing development. So I think it's important to understand that the social housing program faces a number of serious funding issues. Firstly, the subsidies that social housing institutions receive from national government are too small, and importantly, they aren't linked to inflation, which means that as the cost of building, the cost of bricks and glass and metal and labor and all these different things that have to come together to make a development happen, as those costs increase, their SHIs or social housing institutions continue to receive the same amount of money to kind of solve a bigger problem, if you know what I mean. Similarly, the income bands, so that's the income range of people that are targeted for social housing, have also not been adjusted for inflation, which really means that social housing institutions are expected to cater to people who have less money, while at the same time receiving less money from government. So that's not really a sustainable situation. And then I guess what really underpins all of this and drives the message home is that social housing only receives 2% of the human settlements budget, which is quite a small amount. So funding is a massive issue. And again, this suggests that the sort of mixed income model makes some sense. There are also some dangers involved in mixed income models. A big one is that it replicates relying on the private market. I think many people who are here today would probably agree that one of the issues we face now is that many people see homes as a way of making money rather than as a way or as a place to live. And by tying the sort of success of affordable housing to the private market, you risk replicating a reliance on this system that in itself kind of creates housing insecurity. And then a second big risk, and one that we've seen play out quite badly, is that if the market rate component of a development fails, so does the affordable housing. And we've seen this with long delays at Conradi, which is the province's big project in Highlands, and then also on some of the projects involved in the Woodstock and Salt River prospectus. So things seem to be moving along quite well, especially considering that Salt River Market was allocated to Communicare before the prospectus came out and before any of the sites had really been sort of pushed for publicly. But then unfortunately things came to a screeching halt at a DA caucus meeting in 2018. So caucus meetings are meetings where members of a particular party within a government structure, like the city council or provincial legislature, etc., are when members of a specific party meet together and come to decisions. So at the caucus meeting, the transfer of the land to Communicare was blocked. And shortly afterwards, the land price was hiked 530% from about 18 million rand to 114 million rand. And because Communicare was going to only pay 10% of the site's value, they went from having to pay roughly 2 million rand to 12 million rand. And that really, really badly affected their model and reduced the amount of affordable housing, actual genuine affordable housing, which is social housing, that would be included. And it also sort of introduced a lot of risk and uncertainty into the sector and damaged the confidence of a whole range of different social housing institutes. So I'm going to rush through this because we're a bit pressed for time, but there were a whole bunch of very weak reasons put forward for why the price was hiked. The first was that some city councillors didn't understand why there should be a discount on the land if the market rate apartments would generate a profit. Now, this obviously ignores the fact that it was the city themselves who pushed for a mixed income development to take place. And it kind of just ignores the whole rationale of why you have mixed income developments, which is about cross-subsidization and making it possible to actually do this type of project. Then there were some strange claims about instability at Communicare, that the general manager had resigned and the chairperson of the board had resigned. Both those claims are false. The general manager is still there and the chairperson of the board just ended their term. And then there were also some strange claims about Communicare's management of Steyn Villas, and Steyn Villas is managed by a totally different SHI. So I think bearing in mind how weak some of these reasons are is important when it comes to understanding the barriers. So, what I've spoken about now reveals a few things, one of which is that type of decision, the decision of whether or not to go ahead with the sale, should never have taken place at a caucus meeting. That is a decision that affects everyone in the city. And as such, officials and people working in the housing department should have been able to be present so that they could push back against some of those very sort of weak reasons and concerns that I spoke about just now. And then I think the other thing that it reveals is that doubt was a huge factor in the delays. And whether it was real doubt or sort of intentionally mobilized doubt, it really scuppered the project and caused a huge amount of damage. So I'm going to speak through some of the barriers, some of the big barriers. And I think the most obvious one is a lack of political will. And the best way that this is demonstrated is that when Brett Herron was in charge of the Transport and Urban Development Authority and was surrounded by other politicians who were sort of quite passionate about these issues, the things moved very fast. The prospectus came out, all the sites were advertised, there was a big sort of public push. And I think that really shows that things sat dormant for a very long time. And as soon as some political will arrived, they began to move. The second barrier, and maybe the biggest, is that there's really a lack of clarity around how land should be released for social housing and mixed income development. So there isn't a clear process that is understood by people in different levels of government. And they're also, despite the fact that the main contribution that municipalities are meant to make to social housing is by providing land cheaply, releasing land at a discount, there isn't actually a clear obligation for them to do so. And that again creates uncertainty and opens up space for delays. And, in that type of context, I think it's quite unlikely that social housing institutions are going to invest more if they don't have some type of certainty, because for them, risk is a big cost. And the more risky something is, the less likely they are to do it. Then I think another quite serious barrier is a lack of government and social housing institution capacity. And this is specifically about mixed income housing. So mixed income housing is very complicated. You have to work out the cross subsidization. The process is basically more difficult, and we lack the capacity and expertise. And many of our municipal governments don't direct resources towards making sure that there is this capacity. Similarly, I think that limited municipal capacity is directed at preparing land and packaging it and making sure that it's ready for development. And that kind of means that there are too few people doing this type of work, and it makes it very difficult for officials in the city of Cape Town to actually pursue good projects that have higher sort of transformative potential, because they aren't really supported to do so. And then again, related to that is the question of key performance indicators. So these are basically sort of certain targets that you have to hit to either keep your job or to get a bonus. And in the human settlement space, all of these key performance indicators are purely about the number of houses that you build, rather than their quality or location. And that means that from the perspective of a housing official, there isn't really an incentive to do a good project or get involved in a project that's sort of more complicated, but potentially more transformative, if you can meet all of the objectives for your job and receive your bonus by completing, hundreds of houses out in the middle of nowhere where people are quite isolated. Another one is that some of the processes that have to be followed, like environmental impact assessments and water licenses, are very inefficient, and they rely on intergovernmental collaboration, which we clearly struggle with in South Africa. And what I mean by that is that, for instance, for a water license, SHI applies to the city, that then goes up to the provincial government, up to national government, is approved by national government, goes down to the province and down to the city. And that again introduces massive delays and is, in my mind, quite a poor way of doing things. And then finally, I think a big issue was that there was actually weak internal change management inside the city of Cape Town when there was an attempt to push these projects through. And what I mean by that is I don't think that enough work was done to make sure that politicians and officials and everyone working at the city was on the same page, and that they understood what a mixed income development is, why it's important, and why the city is pursuing it. And unfortunately, that really opened up space for doubt and for people to question things, and for all of those sort of quite weak arguments that I raised earlier to come up, because that change management and that internal education hadn't really taken place correctly. So I think something that's really important is that none of these barriers that I've just spoken about now are unique to Salt River Market. They could apply to any other social housing or mixed income housing development across the city and probably most other parts of the country too. And they therefore tell us something about the type of barriers that we face and the reasons that there are such incredible delays. So, I mean, I'm sorry if I've rushed through that quite a lot. We were just getting slightly behind on the program, and I wanted to try and make up a little bit of time. But the question that I want to leave everybody with is this good enough? Can it be acceptable or normal for it to take so long for housing projects to be developed? I understand and accept that the process is complicated. There are a lot of different moving parts, but for people to just be comfortable, for people in government particularly, to be comfortable with the fact that it takes so long to develop an affordable housing project, in my mind, is just not acceptable. The scale of the crisis that we face is humongous, as we've heard from comrades earlier. And the legacy of apartheid, the spatial legacy of apartheid, was built through hundreds of years of very concerted, very targeted, and very intense state action. We can't think that a slow sort of piecemeal approach where it takes anywhere between 8 and 15 years to develop one piece of land is enough, or that can be used to overcome the legacy of apartheid. So I've popped my email address here at the bottom of the slide, and I'll pop it in the chat as well. If anyone has any questions or would like to get in touch, please feel free to do so. But otherwise the question and answer session will come up, and I'll try my very best to answer as well as I can. Cool. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so very much, Comrade Nick Butlander, for that very substantive and a very informative and educational input and information that you've given us. We profusely apologize, comrades, that we're rushing through so that we are not far behind on time. We'll move, comrades. We said that we are not in a church where pastor comes and preaches and then we leave and accept that. So it's time to ask questions, and we'll direct the questions to the panelists that are here. I don't know if Comrade Yushra, if there are any questions that we've noted on your side. And we want to encourage colleagues and comrades here on the call to raise their hands if there are any questions at all that people need to ask, so that those are addressed. So we're just gonna give 15 minutes to this session of a Q&A. I see. Please, let's try to keep our hands very, our input very brief and question precise to the point, colleagues. I noted the hand of Comrade Adi.
Comrade Bukle, this is Yusra. I can give you the 3 questions that came in the chat just while we were chatting. So can I just read through them?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the first question was from Zane Poole, just asking for clarity about why affordable housing and not adequate housing. The second was from Luyanda, saying, how do we push the city of Cape Town to not hide behind pipeline affordable housing projects which don't materialize? And then from one of our people in the room named African National Chicken, how can we hold them accountable since the projects were on course and then they were delayed and stalled? Those were the three questions that came up in the chat.
Thanks, comrades, and the comrade from the African National Chicken for that very important question there. Very interesting name indeed. I want the panelists to note the questions, comrades. Barichalo, comrade Nick. Maybe let me take these two comrades that are here who want to give their oral questions on this platform. Comrade Mark.
Thank you very much. Outstanding presentation and event. My thinking is that we are seeing individual proposals of a range of different sites, each one under very great difficulties to get moving. But, you know, to me, there is a broader issue of having a policy that we all agree for the whole of the precinct of our city, the central areas as one task, and the broader area that is within the policy supported by development. So could we not get everybody united together to agree to the principle of how this policy should be developed for our city, looking at different areas, and moving away from this site-by-site only process? So thank you.
Thanks, Comrade Mark. We're on one left with Comrade Ditch. Comrade Ditch, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Comrade, you'll forgive.
Sorry, I just put my initials in there. It's David, but thank you very much. Sorry about that. I just had a question, and I guess this is posed to Comrades Mndisa and Nick, just specifically because they both seem to be involved in the legalese around these kinds of these topics. Something that I haven't seen mentioned here, and maybe I've missed it, is also how Airbnb affects the decisions of developers and the decisions of the city in terms of seeing lots in well-located areas like Salt River, well-located areas like the currently occupied Ahmed Kathada House. All of those seem. I guess one of the questions I'm asking is, are we also considering how to push back in the city when the city seems to be very keen to relax laws around Airbnb, where in fact we should probably be strengthening laws against Airbnb or restricting Airbnb, because that, at least from what I can see, is also one of the major drivers of doubt in affordable housing and pro-development sentiment. Sorry for the long question.
No, thanks, Comrade, for that input. I'd like to request colleagues in the virtual meeting to please direct your questions to our panelists and not just throw in a question so that you know who should respond. I want to give an opportunity to our panelists at this point. Then I'll take another round of questions so that we try to close because we're behind time. If Comrade Lauren, you are fine. The Comrade Lauren Roy, let me give you an opportunity and you'll be the last hand, then we'll give the panelists to respond.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, things are a little bit noisy in the background here, so forgive me for that. My name's Lauren Royston. I'm Director of Research and Advocacy at CERI. And I just thought that in terms of some of the objectives of this event, what really struck me listening to all the inputs, and I'm sorry, Chair, not to direct this at anyone in particular, but I know that you wanted to try and move towards some kind of statement. But I thought that there are clearly some political questions and there's clearly some technical questions, and it might be quite useful to distinguish those. I think I'm just going to leave the political question, because I think that was clearly articulated through, for example, the DA caucus meeting and what the comrades in Reclaim the City were saying. But on the technical side, I think the analysis that Nick provided was extremely useful. And if we want to try and, I'm sure that NU is already thinking of this, but to me, it seems that there are a couple of key technical issues that we need to try and target. And I think KPIs seems to be one of them, because without it being in your KPI, no officials seem particularly interested, even the relatively good officials. And then secondly, I thought that clarity, sorry about the background, I thought the clarity around the land release procedure might be useful. Lobbying or advocating for that, putting pressure on that. And then I agree with what Mark said around not having an isolated approach, so that we can hold the state to account on the basis of their framework or their plan or their policy for this region of the city. But I don't know Cape Town as well as all of you, so there might already be something like that in place.
Thanks, colleagues. Let's go to the panelists. I profusely apologize, comrades that are raising their hands. I'll probably come back to you. I'm terrible. I have a good heart. I want to give people time to express themselves. Unfortunately, we're working against time. Do not hold that against us. I'll give Comrade Nick. Comrade Nick, what do we do, Kaban, so that these promises do not remain in a policy vacuum? Please attend to the questions that have been raised and directed to you at this point, and we'll share amongst all the panelists.
Sure. So I'll try my best to respond as well as I can. I took notes, but things have blended into each other a little bit. So one question was about, yes, the question from Mark was about, the broader issue of having, rather than having this focus on project by project, having a focus on a broader policy. And I think that's crucial. I think that we need to have a holistic view that kind of sees the city as a whole, and that understands that what happens in one part of the city affects outcomes and experiences in other parts of the city too. And I am pleased to see that the city of Cape Town now has a human settlement strategy, even if there's some parts of it that I disagree with. But we do need that coherence and that sort of coherent approach. And I think that links to a question in the chat from Curtis about whether we should we not rather focus on townships. And again, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's vitally important that we focus on things like informal settlement upgrading, backyarding, providing good economic development opportunities, but we need to do both if we're going to overcome the legacy that we're dealing with. Then there was a question from David about Airbnb and its effect. I will just say that perhaps someone from NU can speak more on this, but I know they have done work on the topic, and it is one of the issues that we're dealing with, is that some types of development are viewed as inherently good and as something that needs to be prioritized over others, when in reality they actually cause quite a lot of damage. And I think that urban development and economic development happen. In some ways they are good things, but they also have these huge negative consequences, like we've seen in Woodstock and Salt River. And the only way to really mitigate against those effects is to build well-located affordable housing that is accessible to as many people as possible. I think I will let others come in there. But yeah, just to say on Lauren's point about KPIs and the need to target those, I think that's really important. If anyone's interested, the South African Cities Network has done fantastic work looking at the issues of KPIs and how they kind of inform decision-making much more than they should. So I'm going to pass over to other people, but I'm willing to answer more questions afterwards.
Comrade, thanks, Comrade Dick. Let's rush to Comrade Mandisa. You'll split the 3 minutes that's left amongst you, comrades. Comrade Mandisa, do you want to come in there?
Sure, I'll also be brief. I'll just speak to two of the points. The first being around the affordability versus adequate housing. So it's not an either or situation. Our constitution provides for the right to adequate housing, and I think in our context what requires is giving meaning to that. To have the right to housing in a meaningful way, it obviously in most instances entails that housing must be affordable so that people aren't displaced or moved out or unable to access their homes as a result of inaffordability. And given the economic context that we spoke to earlier, affordability among other criteria, including location, etc., then become critical to give real meaning or effect to the right to housing. Just to touch on the point raised by Dave around certain developments being supported through their providing Airbnbs, etc. I think taking a step aside from the Airbnb question itself, what you're raising is an important question around the role of the private sector. In terms of how it perpetuates or adds to the exclusionary nature of the housing market that exists in Cape Town and other cities across the world. And so I think obviously various organizations or various groupings have an interest in specific solutions. Ours isn't necessarily to address Airbnb currently, although we are able to articulate and recognize the problem, but rather to also pull in and call in an accountability in terms of the private sector and how their buildings can be exclusionary, and to address that is through a call for inclusionary housing as a mechanism to support or offer more affordable housing in private developments. But the question of the Airbnb kind of issue itself is a real one. We've seen how cities across the world, as I've mentioned, have been affected through, more displacement as a result of the negative implications of gentrification. And I really do think that it's something to look into, especially in areas like Woodstock and Salt River. And then, I think I'll stop there. Most of the questions have for now been addressed by Nick. Yeah. And if not covered, then we'll respond in the chat.
Thanks, Comrade Mandis. And around the political question, in terms of what is it that we do politically to challenge and make sure that these promises are being delivered on, I'll allow Comrade Bevel to answer those at the end of the meeting or chatting the way forward. I'm alerted, comrades, that there are comrades from Reclaim the City that are in the waiting room that want to greet everyone to just chant Amanda there. Those are motive forces on the ground, comrades, that have been carrying this work. Let's allow them, Comrade Lux.
Viva Reclaim the City, viva! Viva! Viva Reclaim the City, viva! Viva! Amanda, thank you, comrade.
Thanks, colleagues. Thanks, comrades. Thank you very much. There are other comrades at AKH that are joining us as well in the occupations and in the inner city. They're with us. We want to move, comrades. I'll introduce Comrade Kyla to introduce us to breakaway rooms so that we have smaller discussions that are very fruitful, so that we're able to chart a way forward around actionable points. Comrade Kyla, let me give you an opportunity, comrade.
Thanks very much, comrade, and hi to everyone on the call. Thank you so much for joining us. It's amazing to see up to 110 people online and to hear, as we know, that more of our comrades are joining us in the various occupied spaces and in different communities, with many of the devices that are online actually representing a small group of comrades who have gathered in a safe and socially distanced way to be part of us, but also to be in person. Welcome to all of you, and recognizing the immense contributions that you've made to this struggle. So as Buhle said, we are going to go into breakout rooms now. I hope everyone can hear me okay and that my connection is quick enough. The breakout rooms are an opportunity for us to have discussions in smaller groups where we can voice even more of the questions, opinions, and ideas that we have. We're seeing a lot of great stuff coming through on the chat, and this is an opportunity for us to be able to speak about these with one another. So I'm sure many have experienced breakout rooms before, but for those who haven't, a notification is going to come up on your screen from the host asking you to join one of 3 different rooms online. All you need to do is click to accept moving into the room, and you'll find yourself with a smaller group of comrades. What will then happen is one of the comrades from Reclaim the City, or NU, will introduce themselves to you all as your group facilitator, and they will help you go through the discussion that you're going to have. Each group is going to have a theme to talk about and a couple of questions to discuss. These themes are primarily looking at the question of how do we take action? What recommendations have been put forward from the research that we've done on our side, but also what recommendations can come forward from the collective wisdom of the group gathered here today. So that is the purpose. Please share as much as you can, and we will return to the plenary when the time is up. One thing to note is that you don't need to worry. Please don't leave. The host is requesting you to come back. Break.
I don't know if we lost Comrade Kyla there, but will be allocated comrades to the breakaway rooms to discuss some of the recommendations, particularly on this to exercise, so that comrades are able to give their own opinions in terms of what should happen going forward. So we're waiting for that message and allocation to pop up in our screens. Then we join those groups and have those.
I would like to see the African national chicken's face.
Andrea, I saw that you asked in the chat whether the presentation could be shared. If you just pop your email address into the chat here, I will take a note and make sure to send it later.
Thanks.
Sure.
Who's the facilitator for this group?
I'm not sure. I thought Robin, perhaps.
Thanks everybody for joining. So I think there's just been a delay in the person from Reclaim the City who's meant to be leading the group. Let me just follow up and get the question to post in the chat. But maybe if there's any remaining questions from the previous session or any discussion that still needs to happen, that could keep going while we just give that a second.
I posted a question in the chat for Nick, and maybe I can just ask it quickly here. Nick, you were chatting about, you were talking about subsidies for social housing companies and how they don't go very far. And at the moment, the city only seems to be exploring this mixed income model, which we've seen with both Salt River Market and Pickwick Housing, that the number of social housing units is just going down and down and down and down and down, and the number of market-related units is going up and up and up and up and up. So we're not impressed. Sorry, I'm Ute from the Woodstock Residents Association. And we are just wondering if any other models are being explored, or what the sort of alternatives could be, if there are other ways to build smaller and build cheaper and build more social housing rather than and less market related. And if we're not, yeah, that's basically my question.
Victor, I think those are fantastic questions. You know, and it's something that I wrote about in the dissertation. And I think that ultimately my belief now really is that it was a mistake at Salt River Market to go for this mixed income model. Yes, it engenders integration. Yes, it can increase the density. But ultimately, what should have been done is we should have gone for the more low-hanging fruit of a pure social housing development. Because as you say, the number of affordable housing units that will be included there has fallen year after year, bit by bit, and has gone from, I think it was 360 odd to now 200 is what they're claiming in their press releases. So, you know, I think, firstly, just from the perspective of us really struggling to implement this type of project, it makes sense to go with social housing. But then also in terms of the actual number of genuinely affordable units that can be delivered, it makes sense to go with pure social housing. But the one thing that I will say is that we are actually in quite a severe fiscal crisis in South Africa, and the housing department and its budgets have taken hit after hit, you know, through this process. And I think that, you know, as a result, we are going to have to be a bit more creative about trying to find ways of basically, yeah, leveraging funding that comes from the private sector, or alternatively, trying to more intensely tax the private sector, or to ensure that there are stronger contributions that are ring-fenced for affordable housing. And alternatively, and sort of in a more ideal world, is we would be going for projects that remove housing, in my opinion, in an ideal world, we'd be going for projects that move away from the housing market entirely, and that focus on things like community land trusts and sort of urban communal ownership and that type of stuff. I think that, you know, while that's what I would ultimately like to see in my dream world, for now, the best we have is social housing, and bearing that in mind, perhaps it is better to go with pure projects rather than projects with mixed income. So I think that's a fantastic question that really sits at the heart of a lot of debates right now.
Would it be possible, thank you, Nick, for that input, would it be possible to have the inclusionary housing as a way to cross-finance social housing, that we have policies very soon to say, if you don't have any inclusionary housing in your private development, you have to pay something towards the social housing fund, so that we can use those funds towards social housing?
Yes, I mean, one would certainly hope so, but the issue with that, and I mean, there's people have different opinions, but my opinion is that if you look at the way that private sector development happens, and firstly, you know, the number of developments that happen, but also the additional development rights that developers are given by the city, I don't think there is enough fat to trim off there to really boost the social housing program to the numbers that we need to see. But at the same time, I personally do think that that is one of the best uses of inclusionary housing or land value capture approaches, is to make sure that that land is directly plugged into affordable housing projects. So it's something that I would like to see, and that should form part of our suite of approaches, and, you know, these sort of all these complementary things that will have to come together. But I don't think that alone will manage to bridge this funding gap, basically.
Can I say something?
Okay, sure. Can I quickly just make a note? We only have 11 minutes. I'll be facilitating here. So, Andrea, you can ask a question, then Nick, you can answer, and then we just have to answer the third question on which Ndifuna Ukwazi just posted. So after Nick and Andrea speak, and then we just quickly talk about that question, and then we can just brainstorm around, and then afterwards we'll take that into the plenary sessions, and then we will be assisting with taking notes.
Okay, my thinking is that probably we need in some way to switch in two things. our activity. One is, okay, you make pressure to the city, try to develop the development, try to push for social housing. But the other thing, I think is important to bring some reflection about also what you said about we need to have some alternative, but it's deep alternative. And I think the question is, I not believe anymore that the public institution, let alone, are able to bring social housing in this country. So the question is how we develop land trust in community trust or common or other way to think in the property, the private, because I think we can have an alternative between public property and private property. So, and try to think in, okay, also because if we want to go, I make an example, we want to go and ask the community to put money, a resource in a project, I will not put money to give to the city. I not trust that they will use correctly. It's not something, I don't have power to determine this. So I prefer said, okay, what is another institution where I can be part and I can in some way control. So we need to have this kind of discussion. There is no simple solution. I don't think so. We found one model around, but we need in some way to put our energy in this way. Otherwise, we fighting, but we become very easily tired because we don't have answer, and the frustration come out very easily.
Yeah, so I'm not don't want to take up a lot of time, but I think that's very true. I think that the need for looking for alternatives is important, and we have to expand to as many different effective approaches as we possibly can to address the scale of the crisis. Anyway, sorry, let's go back to...
Okay, sorry guys, we only have 8 minutes left, so I'll just quickly read the question and then we can also have like a discussion afterwards. So the question is, how can we as communities ensure there is enough political will to urgently complete well-located social and affordable housing projects?
I want to be very cynical. There is no political will. And because there is no political will to go in this direction, there is, to me, there is two things that we can do. One is to try to understand how in the next election somebody starts to thinking to present themselves to have an alternative position in the city. And second, thinking in the long term, what other institution, common or land trust, we can go in this direction. Otherwise, I not believe that it's possible to put political will where there is no political will.
Heather, you may go.
Hi, I'm relatively new to the whole sort of land and housing discussion, and so this might be addressed somewhere else. But I was thinking, you know, the DA had some fairly flimsy excuses around why they kiboshed the different things, and so I was wondering for myself what the actual reasons were that they couldn't say because they were unpalatable. And my thought was NIMBYs being one of them. And I listened to a talk the other day about the universal basic share, which is similar to a universal basic grant. And I was struck by the fact that when people get a basic grant, the entire economy benefits in terms of there's less unrest, there's a stronger economy, there's a stronger investment interest, etc. And I think that parallels quite hugely with housing. You know, and so not that we need to, but we do need to appeal to the NIMBYs and the people who are looking at land as money rather than as investment in people, and maybe frame things around, well, if you want to be able to have investment in your business, if you want to be able to, you know, have your kids go to school and not get hijacked, or whatever the story is. I don't know, you know, but let's find those examples where we can actually have where we can turn the naysayers around, because I think the benefits are quite clear for the people needing housing, but we can make it clearer for the rest of the citizenry as well, that it's a joint benefit.
Sure, thank you for that. We've captured your input. So is there anyone else? Okay, I see Lauren and Laureen in that order.
Sorry, was that Laureen or Lauren? Okay, I'll go quickly. You know, I think we must cut to the quick, really. It's not to be naive. Political parties make regulations, they make legislation, they make policy, and that comes from, clearly it comes from, you know, what their voters want. And, you know, what the current incumbent does is raise its money for its party from big developers. And I'm sure many of you have read Chippy Olver's book, and I really think that one shouldn't be naive, that this is about big business. This is not persuading NIMBYs and so on. Yes, in some cases it is persuading NIMBYs, but that's really on the margins. It's about who controls the property in this town and who controls property since apartheid. It's pretty much the same people who controlled it before. And some big players like Tokyo Sexwale bought in massively into property and made billions out of it. So let's not be naive. It's not just trashing the DA. It's, you know, it's big money in big political parties. Thanks.
Hi. It's Lauren here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I think that it might be quite useful, sounds a bit reductionist, but it might be useful to conceptualize politics in two different ways. So the one is the formal political system, which Laureen has spoken to, and the others are sort of less formal party politics. And I think we have to be aware of both. I agree with Laureen that the sort of formal political space, it's really dominated by the property market, and shifting that, well, I'm not sure that that's going to be done through formal politics. I think we have to look at other avenues, and one of those is litigation. So holding the state to account through litigation, that has positive impacts, but you really have to work at it, as we know in the sector, with twin it with advocacy and engaging the state, not simply using litigation alone. But I do think that in terms of the formal political space, because of the dominance of the property market, I am not sure about the capacity for us to really change that. The problem, sorry, that I know sounds like a devastatingly, yeah, sounds a bit negative, but perhaps it's a question of dual strategies, because I think that the chances of shifting the way the property market works, it's a very long-term project. And it's not only a political one, it's also quite technical in terms of the way rights are registered, in terms of the way the planning system works. And I'm not sure how much will there would be at any point to address that. So I think we do have to look at other strategies that are political, but not necessarily with a capital P. I think we're also up against it because in this sector, we find, and I'm sure NU has the same experience, at CIRI we found that there's not a huge interest in housing, whether it's adequate housing or affordable housing, from donors, from the media, from formal politicians. In fact, a lot of our work is directed at trying to roll back abuses and violations, like the raids we have in inner city Johannesburg, we had under the previous mayor. So just a comment from me around the different kinds of politics that exist and how we need to be less naive, I think, about the formal one.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure my colleague Ntombi has managed to capture most of the inputs that came through. So we are only left with 30 seconds, and it will automatically place us back to the plenary sessions. So in case maybe you had more inputs that you wanted to share with us, maybe I would say share them on the plenary session. So before I won't be able to take anyone's hands. So yeah, we'll see you guys on the plenary session. Thank you so much.
We will just wait for the comrades that are coming back from their breakaway groups. Then we'll start the plenary discussion to get feedback from, I suppose, the very fruitful and substantive discussions that comrades are having in their thematic areas. Just let's give it 30 more seconds for all the comrades to come back in to the plenary session. I think the majority of people in the breakaway rooms are back.
Yeah, no. I was in group 2, and I don't know what's happened now. I need to be back in group 2.
It's okay, comrades. Everyone has been brought back to the plenary sessions. The time for breakout rooms has lapsed. I'm sure the group facilitator will try to cover up some of the discussions that weren't really got into substantively the breakaway groups. So I want to invite the facilitators at this point to just give feedback on how the discussions have went in their group discussions. We'll start with the group in theme 1 to give us the feedback there. Then we'll try to move towards summarizing those and to get some sort of a resolution. The call to action, I suppose, that comes from those breakout rooms. Comrade Kala, do you want to assist us with group 1 maybe?
Yeah.
Who was the facilitator?
I think for theme number 1, our facilitator there was Comrade Jared Sachs. Is that correct, Comrade? With the question on land release and financing.
Hi. Some of the things that we discussed was what are the best ways to deal with the question of funding the social housing institutions. And so one person mentioned how it's important to focus on the social housing regulatory agency and ensuring that it's adequately funded and adequately funds the social housing institutions. So that was, I think, an important point that was made. Another point was made about not getting bogged down in the very specific issues that end up being roadblocks, and to focus also on the bigger picture. of how to make sure that social housing institutions and housing in general is adequately funded, adequately supported. And so those are some of the key points that I think that we discussed in terms of what can be done. And then how can regular people get involved? We didn't have much time for this question, but we discussed the importance of the need to position ourselves as people in a way that assumes that we have a certain amount of power, and not to assume that we are powerless, even though we're facing a certain bureaucratic power of government, and the importance of organizations like Reclaim the City and Abashada Basram Jindolo in kind of building public power is also very important. I might have missed one or two things, but I think I got most of it.
Okay, thank you so much to Jared and the group that had that discussion with you. If I could pass now to Comrade Bevel Lucas, I see that you're there with a group of comrades in the occupation. Could you share what your discussion was there?
Hello. Yeah, thanks. We had to break up the question for people to understand the question, and it was about dealing with the political will and how to influence the political will to ensure that people's voices are heard in these projects that are proposed for communities, and that the communities need to be directly involved, and that these projects should never be allowed to be developed by individuals, but rather in a collective nature, in a group, so that there's some form of accountability. But also...
Comrade Bevel, just a second. Can we please ask if there's another device there that is switched on? Can you please be muted so that we can hear you properly? You can proceed, Leadership.
It is muted. Maybe I should switch it off.
That might help.
Okay.
It's not being used currently.
I think it does.
There we go. That's perfect. Thanks, Bevel.
No, it's okay. I'm trying to just power up. Yeah. Okay. Whilst it's running for the power to go. So the idea is that we should also change the political structure of the administration. People go and vote, but they have no right to recall the representatives. And so the question of recall becomes an integral part of shaping the future political organization. That it cannot be left to the political party alone to determine the representation, but that the communities themselves must have some influence, some determination about the recall of the representation. Another aspect that came into discussion is the question of corruption, of how these projects that are being proposed by the municipalities, how to deal with the question of corruption within these projects, and how to ensure that the communities where these projects are to be delivered or executed, that they have the right to participate in those projects, but they also have the right to determine how these projects need to be managed and to be delivered, to ensure that the community are the beneficiaries of these projects within that community where these projects are to be delivered. Thanks. I hope I
Thank
covered
you
everyone.
very much. Thank you to Bevel and the group there with you at CGH. And I understand that Comrade Ndoxi was there with you as well. And that was Bevel Lucas, a leader of Reclaim the City. Can I pass now to Ntombi Sambu from Ndifuna Ukwazi, a political organizer who is part of Group 3. And if you could just briefly give a highlight on what your discussion was, Comrade.
Good evening, everyone. So our question was, how can we as communities make sure that there's enough political will to urgently complete well-located affordable housing projects? And I mean, in most answers that we've got is that there is no political will. We've said that we might need to stand in like the next elections so that we could have like a position in the city. Others says like occupation is a good way. Another one is maybe have another party in power. And then we said there's got to be like, actually we said political parties, they're making like decisions. They're raising money from like developers and they're persuading like NIMBYs. And a question there was like, who controls properties? And the answer was like big money in big political parties. So we said like we're looking at other avenues like litigation and political strategies. We need to be they said that people, they can't trust the city even if you were to have money to give to the city to do something about it. You wouldn't be able to trust it. To actually trust the city to use that money properly. And we also said we need to look at other alternatives like the CLTs. I'm not sure if I missed like anything else there.
Thanks, Comrade. That's great. Thank you so much. And then Comrade Lumumba, would you like to share maybe one or two ideas from the group that you were with? We have actually reached the end of our time, but I'll just allow that 1 minute to hear from your group, and then we'll hand back to Buhle. Comrade Lumumba, are you with us? If not, I was part of that group, so I can briefly give one swift update.
Go ahead, Comrade.
I'm not hearing Lumumba, so I'm going to just give that. We were discussing what the city itself can do, and we recognize that the city itself has extensive power. It's the custodian of land, and it's also the planning authority for the city of Cape Town. So really it has the power to be a driver of this and to unblock obstacles where they exist. And it's also to lobby if those obstacles are outside of their power. And so our comrade said as people, what we can do is to identify exactly who's responsible for these kinds of actions and who's blocking things, and to hold those people to account, and also to look at the district plan, the Table Bay district plan that's been prepared, and to identify if there are timelines that we can factor in there to actually try hold them to account for deliverables within a certain frame of time. So those were the big inputs from our side. And I'm going to hand back to Buhle with that. Thank you everyone for your ideas.
Thanks, Comrade Kala. Thanks, comrades and colleagues for that politically charged discussions that we're having, particularly taking us one step closer in terms of the advocacy work to make sure that the city delivers on its promises. As you said, colleagues, that this public meeting was not, was not brought about for the sake of only having a discussion. Whilst to appreciate discussions in themselves, they must be accompanied by action. There's a lot of actionable points that comrades in their smaller groups have discussed. So I want to call upon Comrade Yusra, who has noted some of those actionable points, so that we were able to summarize those, so that people know the actionable points that have been raised by all these different groups, so that we are able, when we move forward, to make a call to action as this collective, so that we are able to address this question of spatial injustice, so that there's a release of these 11 sites. Comrade Joshua.
Thank you, Comrade Bukle. What we're going to do just after this meeting is just review the video and make a summary of the points that have been shared here. And we will share that with you, Bukle, and allow you to take that forward with the people present. Does that work?
Sure.
Right. Yeah, just so we get all the points. I've been typing furiously on the side, but I think once I review the video again, I'll capture it a bit more eloquently. Is that yeah? That's it from my side.
Thanks, Comrade Joshua. Comrades, we know that well-located and affordable housing is one of the most powerful tools in the struggle to overcome the legacy of apartheid and spatial injustice. Make sure that those who are caught in the grip of poverty, those who are excluded from the economic activities of this city, are brought back into the city, so that they are meaningful participants in the economy of this country, and also so that we undo the legacy of apartheid and build a more inclusive city that is not exclusive to the majority of our people. Comrades, we said that we want to give a call to action, and part of those call to action is that we know who's responsible for these delays. We know, comrades, why there hasn't been any movement in those 11 sites. And those people have names, they have faces. It's not just departments. And therefore, comrades, it is upon us as people who are gathered there as this collective to make sure that we do something about these 11 sites and these empty promises that the city of Cape Town has given to our people. So we will share, comrades, the details of the MECO member, Malusi Boy, the mayor of the city of Cape Town, so that members of the public who are here can get an opportunity to share their disappointment about the lack of accelerated response in terms of building on those 11 sites. So that's the call to action, comrades. And we want to thank everyone that has joined the call. We will again follow up after consolidating all the actionable points that the comrades have spoken about and send an email in terms of the way forward to all the comrades. And we want to thank everyone for their input. We'll adjourn the meeting, comrades. But we'll meet again, but it will not to discuss this time, but to go to an action to make sure that the city and the Western Cape government deliver on their promises and not give people empty promises. So we thank everyone for joining us. Thanks, comrades.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Nobody wanna see us today. Nobody wanna see us today. When we know, no, 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 no. me tell you about the story of my life. My mother was a kitchen girl. My father was a garden boy. That's why I'm a freedom fighter. Let me tell you about the story of my life. My mother was a kitchen girl. My father was a garden boy. That's why I'm a freedom fighter. Nobody wanna see us at school. Nobody wanna see us at school. Body mommy, no, 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 no. Nobody wanna see us at school. Nobody wanna see us at school. Body mommy, no, 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 no. Tina sizofunda mahala. Bafunde sofunda ngengane. Tina sofunda mahala. Funda mahala. Tina sofunda mahala. Tina sizofunda mahala. Funde sofunda ngengane. Tina sofunda mahala. Funda mahala. Sofunda ngengane. Nobody wanna see us together. Nobody wanna see us together.
Thanks, comrades. Amandla, thank you very much for joining, colleagues. We'll meet again on the streets to demand that something is done and urgently done on these 11 sites. Thanks, comrades.
Thanks, comrade. Yo.